the skills and the experience and even the feeling of failure to some degree is like a good thing to have, right? And it's perspective to have that anytime you're in a tough situation, you're like, things could be a lot worse, right? And so that perspective, I think, you don't get until you've had some downs.
Thanks for joining us on the show today. Look, I've, spent some time looking at your career. You've had some really interesting stops along the way. And the whole premise of, this conversation is to understand, today you're sitting as the CEO of Kajabi, which, is very well known in the creator space, lots and lots and lots of people using it for all sorts of things. But before you got there, what were the twists and turns that actually took you on that path? And I'm super curious, like, how did you get started with this? Like, at what point in your career did you realize that you were on a trajectory to potentially do what you're doing today?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, when I ever talk to groups, everything seems very linear and logical when you look at somebody's LinkedIn profile, right? Like, this natural step made sense here, this one happened there. And like, part of that is deliberate. Like, people like to, have that kind of like natural progression or linear progression to their career. I would be lying to you if I said that, 5 years ago, I was like, I want to be the CEO of a company at the stage that I'm at in my life, right? It was an overall goal for sure. But I think a lot of for me, at a macro level, a lot of stuff is just like things sometimes turn against you and sometimes turn towards you, right? And I think I've been very lucky, like many steps along the way. Like, I can start with family, starts where I grew up. It honestly starts with like Brendan, the high school I went to. And I kind of say that as a joke because he's here, but I do think these things are all interrelated. And so I think it's when stuff breaks your way and you're there to take the opportunity to run with it is kind of like the macro theme. And you're hungry, right? Like, you're willing to do stuff. And that's kind of how it started.
Well, Had, let me go way back, considering how old I am now, and you're a former student of mine. For transparency.
Yeah.
So when you were a tennis star in high school, as I remember, right?
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Did was finance on your radar? Was that something you wanted to do?
No, I'll tell you. In high school, the way it worked was my brother was 4 years older than I was, and went to the same high school, right? Mm-hmm. And he was a smart and very studious guy, right? And so he had kind of trailblazed the path in front of me, which was kind of set the watermark in my family, right? And to give a little more background, my parents are immigrants from Pakistan. They came to the U.S. in the 70s, and they landed in Ohio, which doesn't sound like it makes sense, but I absolutely loved growing up in Ohio. So I grew up in like Northeast Ohio. My parents were physicians in Northeast Ohio. So very educated parents. My brother didn't drop the ball on that at all. He's like a neurosurgeon now in the Bay Area. And so when I was in high school, I don't think I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. I knew I didn't want to be a doctor, right? And so that was one thing. I was like, everybody else is my doctor. I'm going to not be a doctor, which sounds not rebellious at all. But when you're 15 and making decisions, you're like, yeah, I'm not going to be a doctor.
Did that go over well with your parents? Or what?
It was totally fine, actually, because my dad was, again, an immigrant. So the way for him to come to the U.S. was to become a doctor, right? His personal passions were more like economics or political science or things like that, right? So when he came here, he wasn't like, my kids have to copy and paste my thing. I came here to give you guys flexibility. You kind of do you to some degree, right? So when I was going to college, I swear to you this happened. My brother was a biomedical engineer in undergrad. He went to grad school for biomedical engineering. Then he went to medical school and then became like a doctor, right? Mm-hmm. So when I went to college, I was like a fine student. Like I was probably like worst grades than capacity is the best way to describe it, I think.
That's fair.
And when I went to college, my dad's like, you can be any kind of engineer that you want, right? And the caveat there was any kind of engineer, which was hilarious because I was like, none of my like natural inclinations were towards, I wasn't bad at that stuff, but none of my natural inclinations were towards, become like a applied math major in college, right? But that was kind of the box. And like, you kind of play within the box sometimes. So when I went to college, I studied kind of systems engineering and mathematics was my main major. I did another major in economics, and I did a minor in manufacturing engineering. And then I did a master's there as well in systems engineering and mathematics. all at WashU in St. Louis, which is where I went to school. So when I was in high school, I didn't have a proclivity to finance at all. I was like, I had a proclivity to everything else besides like academics, just to be honest. I think when I got to college, I still wasn't like finance. My brother, again, going back to him, he had a bunch of friends who were a little, again, his cohort, and they were all engineers, economics majors who then went to Wall Street, right? And they were like, this is like what the smart kids are doing, which is study something quantitative in undergrad. Doesn't have to be finance, but it has to be numbers oriented, and turn that into a career in Wall Street, right? So then I got laser focused on, well, all the smart kids are doing this. I want to do that too. And that catalyzed like a bunch of like internships and thinkings and networking that I did in college with. After I'd finished my master's, my first job was a job in investment banking. As a result of just like, honestly, people who I thought were smart were doing this, it was almost like I followed them into that path. So it wasn't like I went to Wall Street Journal when I was 15. Like none of that stuff existed at all. Like zero of it.
Yeah, I'll describe Ahad this way. He had a lot of horsepower, but he was in like third gear. Right? Like it was always there. We knew it.
Yeah,
it was just like, when's he going to drop into fourth and fifth?
Yeah,
which obviously you did in college.
Yeah, we did.
But where was there an event in college, an internship, something that got you to where? What was the first one? William Blair and Company.
Yeah, it's a couple of things. What I did between my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college was I did an internship, not finance related, but I moved to London for the summer, right? And I interned at the House of Lords, which is in the government, there's a House of Commons and a House of Lords, right? House of Lords is like this, it's not like our Senate, but it's like lifetime appointments. It's like this relic of like, I don't know, British past, right? But the internship was amazing because when I was on my own for the first time, like living in London, which is fantastic, you're meeting people from all over the world, kind of in the job, but also just like young kids like mucking around the city. And what it catalyzed was like, there's so much opportunity in this world, and people are people are laser focused on their stuff, right? Like people aren't like, oh, I want to do it. I met like 17, 18-year-olds who are like, I want to be Prime Minister of the UK, or I'm from this country and I want to do this. And I was like 17 or 18 and I was like, I don't know anything. So I think when I came to college, there's also a guy, I don't know if you remember a guy named Ajay Dumbal.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So he was my roommate at WashU.
That's right.
This guy was like the top student in our class.
He was unbelievable.
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 He just kicked me around college all the time, just always beating me at everything. So I had this like guy sitting next to me who I've known since I was 15, just doing great in college every step of the way. He was like a nice little barometer to try and keep up, though I could never keep up, but this guy was just a machine. But that internship, all that compounded was like, all right, cool, I got to take some stuff more seriously than I think I had historically. And my dad was just like, when college is over, you're on your own. Like, this isn't like, there's no like options here of like, you're going to
payroll.
Yeah, there's no family business. There's no nothing. So, and he's like, you like grew up, as you get older, you kind of realize the economic situation you grew up in may have been unique and you're really blessed and all this stuff. And he was just like, that stuff didn't just happen. So if you want to repeat that stuff, you got to do it on your own. And this is what you got to do. So that's where it started happening, where I was like, all right, I got to get my stuff in order. So then I went back to London, did an internship at Bank of America in college. And then I was just like, I'm going to figure this banking thing out. And so it was a lot of networking, a lot of that landed that job. But I think there was a confluence of events that happened popping college that made me just more focused than I had been historically.
Did you find that, because before you said, when you're in high school, you're going to get an investment, you're like, no way. I like a million other things I'm interested in. But then, all that work you did in college, was there a moment you're like, I think I like this. Like, I'm getting passionate about it.
I don't think I went into banking thinking I was going to like it. I think I went into it thinking that it unlocks a lot of career potential and it teaches you a lot, right? It was on the job training like you've never experienced, which is they take you and they just drop you in the middle of like finance, a little bit of training, but it's like you're learning corporate finance. So I'd never taken a finance class before I did it. I had in my cohort were people who were like went to Wharton undergrad and were finance majors, right? So it was very much like trial by fire, but and very intense. Like you're working 80, 90-hour weeks for like 2 years, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it was a better way to learn.
What did that unlock for you?
I think it unlocked knowledge acquisition was one thing, just like getting really fluent in finance. I think it also unlocked that like if you want to work hard, you can work hard, and that understanding of like I think Brendan's analogy, there's a fourth gear, fifth gear, sixth gear if you want to go into that gear.
Yeah.
And having the confidence that I've been in that gear and I'd be able to produce in that gear has like a lot of confidence building compounding effects over time that I use till today. Like I'll be like, if there's a moment in time where I need to like really get after something, I'm not hesitant to get after it because I've done that in the past. And I think the whole point of banking is to teach you a lot about finance, obviously, and open up opportunities. But at a personal level, it was like, it pushes you beyond where you think are your limits. And then you have new limits because you've kind of exceeded what you've done in the past.
Yeah. How did you leverage those limits? Like what was the next step?
So like after that job, it's funny. So I was in Chicago for my first year. I went back to London for my next year, right? So I always wanted to live abroad. There's like this international thread that I've been existing in. And so I moved back there, and I was an analyst in London. It was cool. It was like, it was working a lot, but instead of my diligence trips to go visit businesses, like when I was in Chicago, it's like you go to Arkansas and you meet like a refrigerator company or something. It was like you're going to London, you're going to fly to Milan, and you're going to meet like this like cool company doing this. So like it was eye opening from the world is, again, same theme. World has a lot of opportunities. You just got to put yourself there. From a career perspective, it unlocked like, frankly, the next step was other jobs in finance. So you could work at a hedge fund, you could work at a private equity firm. Just things started coming at you versus you having to go get it, right? And that felt very different than when I was trying to get into banking, where I was like so thirsty for the opportunity to get a job. All of a sudden, people are like, "Oh, you have this experience, like you should come work here," right? Which was which was very nice. At the same time, I got married, so my wife was at the University of Michigan doing her master's, and she's an architect. So we were like, man, should we stay in London for a while or should we go back to the US? And so we ended up kind of deciding to go back to the US. So I moved back to Chicago for about 2 years, and I worked at a hedge fund in Chicago called the Discovery Group. And I just didn't like it. It was one of those things where, again, I was doing that because all the smart people kind of went into like the hedge fund world. And I was like, cool, I'm just going to double down on that path. And when I got in there, it didn't play to my strengths at all. It was very like internal, heavy analysis. You're not talking to people. You're kind of behind a desk, like crunching numbers all day. And that wasn't my jam. Does that make sense?
Was that the moment though? Like, I mean, I'm just thinking through, like you're like up to this point you're talking about, I think this is the path that everybody else is taking, so I should take it too.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're like, you know what? I don't think I like this path. Like, so was that the moment where you started to shift in a different direction?
No, there are two things. I think Spectrum was the moment, but it was the end of Spectrum when I was like, I know what I like, what I don't like, and I'm going to make a career transition to what I like. Right.
Well, tell us about Spectrum. Like, if you're not familiar with Spectrum, what is that about?
Spectrum Equity is a private equity firm based in Menlo Park in Boston. They invest in like technology-enabled services. So you think of SurveyMonkey or SeamlessWeb and Grubhub or Ancestry.com or like all these sometimes consumer, sometimes enterprise, but technology businesses. Right. Mm-hmm. And the job there is to like, as a junior person especially, it's to go out and find companies to invest in, right? So a huge part of your day is spent cold calling, flying places, meeting entrepreneurs, like trying to understand their story, mark them, like map the market, get smart about industries, yada, yada, yada. And then if you find an investment opportunity, you run at it and try to put money to work, right? I loved that job. And the reason I loved it was because it was very externally focused. Like you're on the phone, you're talking to entrepreneurs, you're like getting their story. It was inspiring because of the like people in like, again, like Ohio were building these like massive businesses. And I'm like, how the hell did you think about this? Or even, and they're like, here's my story. It was like unbelievable exposure to like entrepreneurship. Right. And then the flip of it was it took advantage of my background in finance. That was like this really cool combination. At the end of that journey, I was like, man, the people on the other side of the table, the ones like doing the work and building the companies, they are so interesting to me because they are like, building the future is like too grandiose, but they're building enterprises in value, and they're like, all the ones I met were kind of enjoying it, and they're like also putting a dent in the universe a little bit, whatever dent that they wanted, right? The investors are like catalyzing it and putting fuel to the fire, but the operators are the ones who are doing the work. And I was like, I want to be an operator, right? Because it's like, you do the work, you're like, it's the rewards and the downsides of it, but like, it's just really cool to be on that side of the table. And that, at the end of Spectrum, I was like, I want to be on that side too. So that was a catalyzing moment for me, which was like, I think I'm done with like traditional finance, or at least for now, traditional finance. And I want to get into the company building mode. And I was in Silicon Valley, which is, there's not a better place to do it, right? Like I was living in Menlo Park, working in San Francisco type stuff.
Yeah, but before we get after Spectrum, Mahad, have you always been this reflective?
You know, in this role, this CEO role, people ask you about your story pretty often.
Yeah.
So it forces you to think about stuff pretty often. But I, you know, like the other part of it is, I think where you're lucky enough to kind of land in these seats is people ask you for like help and guidance a lot. And I try to spend a lot of time talking to people who are like earlier in their careers than I am and are trying to navigate what they're doing. They're like, why'd you do this? And why'd you do this? And like, again, none of this stuff is necessarily linear. Like it sounds like it is, but things just happen. But there are, to your point, catalyzing moments where you're like, I want to triple down on something. And that was probably one of them.
Do you think you picked
that
but
up?
Sorry, go ahead, Brendan.
No, Peter, go.
No, I was just curious. Like, did you pick that up? I mean, you said earlier when you were at Spectrum, you were calling CEOs or entrepreneurs and hearing their stories. Was that the thing that motivated you to do the same for others?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, I'll tell you well, for sure. I think I had good bosses too, right? There's a guy at Spectrum who I used to work for, and he would just like talk to you about your career. And he was this prolific dude, like loved this guy. And I was always like, man, I would love to like turn into like a version of him. And it wasn't just like he was like good at his job. He's a good person, good values. I don't know, like the whole thing about him, his whole brand, I was like, I'm sold. And, I learned a lot from him, right? And so then as I started getting older, and older means like just getting more experience, people are just like, hey, I'd love to talk to you about something. And I loved it when I received it. So passing that on has always been like a huge thing for me because, I don't know, you can impact people pretty profoundly if you do it right. And I think that's a good way to live your life a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. Brendan and I talk a lot about like as we age, we become more reflective, right? And thinking about, what really matters and like how do we shape things and how do we do it in a meaningful way to help others. And yeah, it sounds like you got there a little bit faster than we did.
Well, totally. Yeah.
Silicon Valley is full of that. To give the Valley credit, there's a lot of like, I think when you live there and you experience it, it's not always the way that it's covered in media. And so when you live there, people are very, very open with their time, right? You'll email like somebody, you'd be like, this person never get back to me. And they'd be like, great, let's grab a coffee on Wednesday at 12 o'clock, meet me here, right? And there's an ethos in the Valley around like mentorship and guidance and like, I fail here, don't they make this mistake? Free advice. A little bit of that is probably like, they love talking about themselves. So there's like a little bit of like, let me tell you my story type stuff. But there's also the ethos of like, truly like, we're all kind of doing this. And if I can embark on you any lessons learned the way, than my path, I will do that. And I think that's a Valley dynamic too. I wouldn't just say I think it's like a huge ethos that people don't talk enough about that happens there. That is like, young people benefit from quite a bit. And so I did. And so you're just feeding into the same system.
Go ahead, Brandon. Yeah.
I was just going to say Spectrum. What happened after Spectrum? Let's get back on the path.
Yeah, for sure. So, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say the path took a turn. It's fascinating.
Yeah. So after Spectrum, I think it was, how do I get to the other side of the table, the operating side? And again, being in Silicon Valley, I would say there's like myths about the garage startup and like two people in a room and like 5 years later, you're rolling in like Scrooge McDuck, like swimming through cash. So a little bit of it was that, right? It was like, all right, I want to go really early, like nascent stage company, and I want to build from scratch. So at Spectrum, I talk to entrepreneurs all the time. I made a connection with one guy who had sold his company. It was a games company, sold it to a business called Playdom. Playdom got acquired by Disney. Like, so he had this really cool path. And he's like, I'm going to start another company. And if you're up for it, you could be my first employee. Right. And I was like, absolutely yes. Like, so sign me up. And that was the step. It was like, I knew I wanted to do it. I was looking for the right opportunity. I had known this guy and he'd had a good track record. So I was like, I'm going to do this. Like, now's the time. Right. So it was a mobile games company called Kiwi, based in Palo Alto. Literally was like working out of his house for the first couple of months. His co-founder was a CTO and myself. So 3 people. And we got really lucky early on, right? We raised our first round of funding from Sequoia Capital, which is a big venture firm. Mm-hmm. We worked out of their offices for about 3 or 4 months, which is awesome. Like, you're walking by all these like entrepreneurs, investors, people you read about in the media, like they're literally sitting next to you all the time, which was really cool. And the first 24 months were like up and to the right? Like, we were generating revenue, we were profitable. We went from 3 employees to 220, like just in like boom, right?
Wow.
And it was amazing. So again, in my personal, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be a billionaire. Like, my first shot, this is so easy. Like, everything's happening easy. But then the reality of it kind of happened, which is startups are very like up and down, and the highs are so high and the lows are so low. And I think on Kiwi, what happened was we were in the game space, and I'm not trying to go too far into detail on this, but games or like movies or entertainment are cyclical, which is they'll be hot for a while, then the new one comes along and you kind of die, right? And that's literally what happened to our business. Like, the first iterations of it, we were focused on Android because iOS was like really competitive. Android was going to be the bigger ecosystem. We had this whole platform play, yada, yada, yada. But we were really hot, all the games, and then we were not. And that was just like it was truly a Silicon Valley story where at the end of the day, I was there for 4 years. Financially, didn't do anything. I was married with 2 kids, but experientially, it was extraordinary, right? Like, taking a company from 3 guys in a garage to what we did, raising capital, building product, learning how to distribute it, learning how to manage people, like all that stuff. It was like, I would never trade that 4 years for anything in my life, because it's just like early training grounds that I'm, again, another theme I'm like still benefiting from today quite a bit. But it was a crash and burn story at the end. Like, we sold it for parts at the end.
What were some of the biggest lessons you took from that? I mean, I can't even imagine going from 3 to 200 and, would you say 250?
Yeah. 220, yeah.
220 people. I mean, that's hyper growth. There's a lot of challenges that come with that. And like, in your role, what did you extract from it?
Like, overall lessons were, it was a bunch of really smart people in the management team, like really smart people, but not product people per se, right? And in tech, which I think is the right orientation, the best product should win, not the best distribution or the best like tricks of getting people into your funnel and all this. We were awesome at that. The analytical piece of that company, A++, like I think we should build an analytics company versus a games company. The reason we lost is because we were in a creative industry, and a creative industry requires actual creatives to build like really cool product that then like, people like enjoy because it's like a nice experience. And as the market got more competitive, the people who are really good at developing the best creative product were the ones who are winner. And that's the way the market should go, right? Best product should win. We were smart guys who were good at distributing the product, understanding the analytics behind the product, but not developing like the next version of it. So that was a lesson in terms of the horsepower, the brains around the table can only take it so far. You have to building things that people want sustainably over time. I know that sounds like obvious, but it wasn't when you go from so much success in 2 years, you're like, oh my God, I can do anything, to like crashing on the back of it. So it was a good early lesson. I think another one is like brand names don't matter. Like you can have the best investors in the world. Like the CEO of the company was a Harvard undergrad, Stanford Business School grad. I love the guy, but like all like credentialing and all that stuff that like, you know, a little bit of like where I went to high school and all that kind of stuff. You put a lot of emphasis on that. You realize that stuff, you kind of put it to the side. Like, it's not like you can't judge people on where they come from, what they did. Because a lot of the people who were kicking our ass were like, I don't know, like didn't go to college or didn't do anything. They just were really good at something, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a real life lesson around like the way people acquire knowledge and what they do with it. It's not always the traditional means to have the best outcomes, right? So I thought that was awesome. Then also, like, success is not guaranteed. Like, you got to work hard no matter what, and like things should never happen. If they happen too easily, usually there's something wrong with that. And I just took something out of that for sure.
How did that product lesson carry forward to the next company that you went to? Because that, I mean, it's so true. It's interesting. You know, I've had lots of experiences where I've been at product forward companies, and you know, we invested everything back into the product and did really well. But then we had competitors that had different philosophies and did equally well, if not better. And I'm just curious, like, as you were moving on, like, how did you apply those lessons to the next phase of your career?
Oh yeah, great question. So the two requirements I had on the next position that I wanted were, I love the mobile industry at the time. I thought there was still a lot of work to work there, and I wanted to stay within like the go-to-market motion of B2C, which is, it's not enterprise sales. So it's not like you're not calling people. It's like digital distribution, right? I want to use all the social media platforms. I want to use like a product-led growth. I want it to be self-service. Like, I like that part of the world. I didn't want to go into like enterprise sales or B2B enterprise, right? And probably a second order one was like, I want to be at a design forward company, like something that solves a problem in a really, really nice, elegant way. And that had good unit economics, which is like always the thing. So the next one I joined, again, I had a fantastic experience on, is a company called MyLIQ, which is pretty unsexy if you think about it from a Silicon Valley perspective. What they did was mileage tracking for expense reimbursement and tax deduction, right? So you're like, all right, if you're in the Valley, it's not like grocery delivery to your front door. It's not like Uber, like all these things were happening at the time. It was like mileage tracking, automated mileage tracking. But this, you might find this funny. I was in high school, and there's this guy named John Trelevin who I went to high school with. And we were driving somewhere in Hudson, Ohio, which is where we went. And he had his journal, and he pulled it out and he's writing his journal. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And he's like, my mom's getting me to track my miles, so I know like I'm driving from here to here, and she just wants me to write like how much I think it was for gas purposes mostly. But he was like, had a log of what he was doing. I was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, so, and then when MyLIQ came across, I was like, man, it's not a Silicon Valley problem, but it is a massive problem for where I grew up and the people who I grew up with, and like particularly middle school and elementary school, who are like still in Northeast Ohio, are like contractors or attorneys or architects or construction people, and are driving for work. Yeah. This is a massive problem for them, right? Which is, they're underestimating the miles they drive for work every single year. That means they're losing out on dollars that they could be saving by reducing their tax burden. And it sucks for them, like all this stuff. And I was like, this is an awesome problem in my mind. And it was funny. The founder of the company is from St. Louis, right? So we had this Midwestern connection. I went to college in St. Louis, but like, he's born and raised in St. Louis. Went to like a high school like mine in St. Louis. So we had all these things in common. But he was like the founder CEO. I clicked with him immediately, and we kind of spoke the same language. And so the theory there was, this app essentially is selling to prosumers, who are people with Schedule C employees, people who own their own businesses. And what it did was, it automatic tracked your miles. It was free to start, so 40 drives for free. But then any information after that, you have to become a paying subscriber and pay $6 a month, right? And the way we used to sell it was, if you drive more than 12 miles for work, this app pays for itself because it's 53 cents per mile, right? And it was just
That's great.
Like amazing, right? Again, unsexy problem, like ununderstood TAM, like all these things, but just awesome. And the team was fantastic. Design focused. So the guy from St. Louis went to Stanford. He was product design major at Stanford, worked at this firm called IDEO, which, if you guys know IDEO, is like the mouse was built, like the Apple mouse was there. And he was like design focused. He needed like he also business focused, but he needed like a business partner. I was like, sign me up. And we joined, and it was like an awesome story. Like we built it. It was fun. Frankly, I got, again, really lucky where a couple of months after I joined, Microsoft is like, we want to buy this thing. And so I was just, again, one of those things, right time, right whatever opportunity, and Microsoft picked us up. So then for a good, like a healthy price. So, we were all very lucky and got to work in Microsoft. So that was kind of my LIQ. It was decision-making. There was great product, great founder, understood TAM, like people didn't really get it, but I kind of got it. I think because I kept thinking about the meatheads I grew up with, and just fun. Like it was a fun experience.
That's wild. And I'm like thinking through the few stops before that, because you're at Spectrum. Spectrum was relatively small, right? That wasn't a large organization, and then.
No, it's not big.
And all things considered, Kiwi, even at 225, still a relatively small organization.
For sure.
Now, like I live in Seattle, so when you say Microsoft, like, have you ever driven? I mean, I'm sure you've been to the corporate campus. It is massive. And now all of a sudden, you're part of this like you are on this, ocean liner now. Like, what was that like?
It was intellectually interesting, right? So Satya Nadella had taken over as CEO about a year after before I joined, right? Mm-hmm. So it was kind of, the analogy is you could feel the tanker starting to turn, right? Because you can't make change that quickly in an organization that big. Right. You could see the tanker starting to turn, and you could see people succeeding in that environment and failing in that environment, right? And as an acquisition, I didn't really have a dog in the fight, just to be honest. Like I was never going to be a Microsoft lifer. I knew that from day one, right? I was like, I'll do this for a while. It's a great opportunity to learn, meet some people, figure out how Microsoft works. But this wasn't my career path. But what I did do is, like, when you have that freedom of like, I'm not stressed about like the next promotion or whatever, you're kind of like free flowing. So I'd go up to Microsoft, meet with all these people, talk about things. So you understood the organization pretty well. You could see it changing for the good, I think. But it was drastically different, right? Because with 150,000 people, I think, I don't know what the exact number is for Microsoft, even bigger. It's just like day and night in terms of what I experienced and what that thing was doing. But it was, I would lie to you if I didn't think it was a fantastic, like, time well spent, right? Again, it's just one of those things where you meet fantastic people who've been in Microsoft for a long time. You meet people who've been there for a long time. You're like, you're not fantastic, but you're hiding, and that's something unique too. So like, it was just exactly. Yeah. It's just like one of those like really cool experiences in life, but nothing that I would want to make not knocking anybody who wants to do that. It just wasn't for me in terms of what I want to do with my life.
I was part of a company that got acquired, a small company, 100 people. We got acquired by, I don't know, maybe it was 4,000 or 5,000 people, publicly traded. So it was a big shift, right? You went from small startup to, larger corporate entity. And I was there for 3 years, and I think it was some of the 3 of the most valuable years that I ever experienced career-wise, because I learned a lot about how big corporations run and how do you move projects along in a way that's efficient, even though you've got multiple layers. Like, how did you pick up any of that? I mean, was there anything in that larger organization from operating on the day-to-day that you carried forward?
Yeah, like, to their credit, for the first year and a half, they would let us operate independently, right? So we were in this big umbrella organization, but we were kind of executing against our own roadmap. As time went on, naturally, they're like, cool, like, let's start integrating this thing more closely, which made total sense, right? They bought the company, so that was the whole, like, trade you make. And as that was happening, I think lessons learned for me there were like, startups work differently, And to Microsoft's credit, they wanted to learn how we worked and try and apply those things. I wouldn't say throughout Microsoft, but in corners of where Microsoft worked, right? So we were really embedded teams, like cross-pollinated teams. It wasn't like product sits here and engineering sits here and marketing sits there, and everybody kind of sat together, but also made decisions together. So a lot of this was like just evangelizing how we worked within the Microsoft organization. I think the rigor in which they did things, I actually appreciate it. Like particularly on the financial side, it was like they were pretty good about getting into the weeds and being thoughtful about the way they spent money and dollars and tracking them, which I thought was great. There was leadership stuff that I took away, right? Sure. One theme was from even the CEO of MileIQ. He had this concept of very simple language when you're talking to your teams, not in a pedantic way, but in a like just keep messages like really simple so people can digest them very easily. But his framework was tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them, right? 3 very simple things. It's like, and I think a lot of the times people can just get confusing or over intellectual about stuff and overcomplicating things. But that framework to me is stuck with me quite a bit. It's like, tell people what you're going to tell them, tell people what you're You're going to be blue in the face because you're going to repeat yourself so many times. But what that does is it lets that message seep into the organization, no matter who the audience is. And if you're saying the same thing to everybody, everybody's going to understand what's going on, right? And as you get into these, I'm lucky enough to be in the seat that I'm in, I think that lesson is coming back in a good way. Like I'm trying to utilize it more and more that I can, which is, it's not always like, frankly, it's hopefully most of the time you don't have the best idea or whatever, but you're making decisions at a strategic level and you're sticking to them and you're keeping them simple and you're repeating them. So everybody kind of knows what they're working against or kind of working on from the same song sheet. That's something I think of Microsoft, particularly the CEO of MileIQ, but even that whole organization, they did a good job on, which is trying to articulate things simply, holding people accountable, to be clear. And it wasn't simple to get there, but the messages and the goals were very simple and digestible, which I think is really important for any organization.
Yeah. So
it sounded familiar because you learned it in public speaking.
Right? Yeah, that part of it too. Yeah, I delivered it beautifully as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Well, Kajabi. So you went from Microsoft to Kajabi, and Kajabi is it's a fascinating space. This creator space is just emerging in a way that it's turbocharged at the moment.
Yeah.
Lots of competition out there, lots of interesting things that are happening. Lots of people who have just through the pandemic said, you know what, I kind of want to be my own boss. I want to do my own thing.
That's right.
So you left this large organization and now you went to go to Kajabi. Like, what was that? First off, how did you get there? Like, what was that transition like?
Yeah, of course. So Microsoft structured it where, they kind of incentivize you to be around for about 3 years, right? So when my 3 years were ending, I was like, all right, like I need to figure out what's next, right? And so that's when you start like meeting up. Again, the Valley, giving the Silicon Valley culture a lot of credit here. You just start having coffees and breakfasts and lunches and dinners. And you're just like, what's happening? Trying to when you're in the startup world, you kind of know everything that's going on all the time. When you're in Microsoft, you don't have to be worried about it as much. So I was kind of removed from what was happening in tech at the ground level. So I re-immersed myself in what was happening, like the trends are happening, what startups are doing well, what opportunities there are by these conversations. So I started that, and I was kind of, again, the same themes. I wanted to stay in a B2C distribution model. So product-led growth, self-service marketing, that kind of thing. This gets a little bit personal, but my wife and I were living in Menlo Park, and we had 2 kids at the time. And it's expensive as hell to live in the Bay Area. And even if we were super lucky, we had an egg, all this stuff. It was we're super lucky, but it was just man, this is still not the easiest life we could choose, right? And I was open to leaving the Valley as well because of that. I was like, well, there's got to be, you can do this in different places. So I didn't want to be myopic about staying in Silicon Valley. I wasn't planning on leaving per se, but I was like, let's just open up the pressure here and see where else we go. I was actually thinking about Chicago because, again, we're from the Midwest. My wife's from Illinois. I was like, Chicago's an easy place for us to land because, all these connections, all that kind of stuff. But the main things I cared about were the end user being a consumer or prosumer, the technology solving reducing the administrative burden for customers, right? In whatever capacity that is. So what my LIQ did. The way I found out about Kajabi was Spectrum Equity. So two guys I used to work with. One guy was my colleague and one guy I used to work for. They had put money into this company called Kajabi based down in Irvine, California. And I was grabbing dinner with him and his wife, who are very good friends of ours. His wife and I actually went to college together, though she was way too cool for me in college, so we didn't know each other. And then John Connolly, who is the board member at Kajabi, him and I were friends, colleagues at Spectrum. And I was like, yeah, man, the same constraints. Like, I'm cool with leaving the Valley. I kind of want to stay in this like B2C product growth and SaaS world. And he's like, I got something for you. And I was like, okay, sure. And a couple of days went by, and I was like, I don't know what he was talking about. So I emailed him. I was like, hey man, just following up. Like, what did you have? And he's like, check this company out. And so I went to their website. And I was just doing research, and I was like, this is so cool, right? Pre-COVID, to be clear, right? And I was like, this is so cool because the themes there are very similar to what MyLIQ was, right? The product was taking all these different fragmented tech stacks that people have and trying to consolidate them into one software vendor that, again, reduces the administrative burden of being an online entrepreneur, right? So that is really cool. That theme to me was awesome because one, there's the consolidation and the all-in-one aspect. Two, it's all digital commerce, right? So do you make a bet on digital commerce being more in the future than now in 2019? Yes, right? Because I was like, this is easy. Like, this is not a bet. It's like, of course, that's going to be where it is. And frankly, I knew the investors, so I was like, I trust these guys like implicitly, like good, bad, or ugly. They'll treat me well. They're also smart guys, so I trust their judgment. And then I was like, yeah, man, put me in touch. So I met with the founder, a guy named Kenny Reeder, who's a founder CEO. I absolutely love this guy. So he's born and raised in Irvine. Built Kajabi from scratch, started in 2010, bootstrapped it for his first 9 years.
Wow.
Right? So no outside investors, no nothing, just built this like foundationally amazing business, right? Mm-hmm. Both from a product perspective and financially. It was just like built right? Built sustainably. It was profitable. It was growing correctly. It was solving customer needs. The way the product roadmap unfurled was always, what do the customers need? We're going to build it. What the customer need? We're going to build it. And it sounds, again, obvious, but like he lived and breathed that stuff. And when I met him, I was like, man, this is really cool. And then when you think about the market it was playing in, and digital commerce and all this stuff, I was like, this should be a massive company over time. I love it, right? And so then we moved. So we moved from Menlo Park, which is kind of right in the peninsula of the Bay Area, so kind of central Silicon Valley. It's like Mountain View, Google, all these companies are next door. We moved to Irvine, California in like August of 2022. I joined in August of 2020. I joined in March of 2020, which is COVID, right? And that's something that I like, again, pure unadulterated luck, right? Because what companies like Kajabi did like every single day for 10 years prior, all of a sudden became a huge need for people, right? The ability to engage in commerce digitally and remotely away from each other, COVID just exacerbated that need to a degree that I don't think anybody anticipated. And it was just like gangbusters at the company.
I mean, online
right?
courses,
in a good
right?
way.
Like all of a sudden that was...
For sure. Online courses, but what we've tried to do is our bread and butter in our history was online courses for sure. What we want to be thoughtful about is building the best platform from online commerce, right? And when we say commerce, it's like we want to build amazing knowledge products, right? So online courses is that, membership sites is that, podcasting capabilities are that, a community product is that, newsletters and other variations of the transfer of knowledge from one person to another, one person to many, synchronously or asynchronously, is our business, right? And we have all those knowledge products, but it's within a platform that enables you to build the website, take payments, manage your email list and have a CRM, understand business analytics. So it really is a consolidation of all these different fragmented tools that live online. You can do all of that via Kajabi. And when you think about the cost of it too, it's a lot cheaper to do it here as well, right? So like all those things are what got me really excited about it. And that's where I think the future of a lot of commerce is. It's like more people are going to be becoming online entrepreneurs. It's easier. There's more money to be made. People control their destiny a lot more. The entire creator economy is about entrepreneurship and figuring out ways for people to make money off of what they know and love. And Kajabi's been in that business since 2010. So that's kind of our story in a nutshell.
So you joined as the COO and CFO, and how you were in that role for what, about a year?
Yeah. So I joined again in March of 2020. The story behind that is it's one of those things that wasn't planned. So our CEO, again, Kenny, he had a family health issue. And so about a year and a half into, maybe a year and a quarter into the tenure here, he was just like, kind of torn, right? Because this is his baby and he built it. But he was just like, I got, to his credit, he was like just prioritizing a situation in his family. And he's like, I got to step out here because we had new investors. There was a lot of stuff going on. He's just like, I just can't do both at the same time, right? So he stepped up into he's our executive chairman and a board member. And I stepped into the CEO role after that, right? So again, it wasn't like I had ever planned to be CEO of Kajabi. I joined as like, this will be a great experience. And, like hopefully the next one will be like my chance to be CEO. But it's one of those things where you're just kind of right place, right time. So that's kind of how it happened.
And I hope the health issue is okay.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. They're great. They're good shape. Yeah.
So how's that work with the founder being now the chair and you being the CEO? Like, what's the interplay there?
It's a lot in the sense that we talk a lot, right? So we have weekly, like just office hours where we get together for like an hour every Wednesday is like kind of where we sit down. I talk to him about things I'm seeing and feeling, trying to get his advice. He's got all this amazing, frankly, founder institutional knowledge that like I wouldn't be lying to if I were to say I'd be able to like come to that level of like, 'cause when you build it, it's different, right? And having that resource there is just extraordinary, right? Like sometimes it's products, sometimes it's customers, sometimes it's like, I don't know, other things that are related to the business where he's like, well, this is how I would think about it. It doesn't mean it's dictatorial, right? Like I have my own opinion about stuff, but it's just a great sounding board and opportunity to talk to somebody who's like been in the seat that I cherish that quite a bit. So it's been really good for us so far.
Yeah. Amazing. And what a journey, right? From crunching numbers in finance to now literally like Kajabi couldn't be further away from that role in the sense of you're trying to empower, individual entrepreneurs to like break out, right?
Well, it's amazing. Like I would say that, I joined as a CFO, but I'm not like a traditional like green visor in the corner, like counting, pennies CFO type. Like it was never my like MO, right? It was much more operationally focused from the get-go, which is we can do all the finance stuff that you guys need us to do as a CFO and all that kind of stuff, like accounting and audits and all that kind of stuff. But it was much more forward in terms of like, what are the KPIs of the business? How do we make sure our heroes, who we call our customers, are successful? What are we building for them? How do we make sure they're providing them more opportunities to drive more revenue to them? Because our business, just to kind of go back to this a little bit, it's different than a lot of the other businesses that exist in the ecosystem, right? A lot of the other businesses are like take rate models, which is if you make $100, we're going to take 12%, so we're going to take $12. If you make $100,000, we're going to take 12%, we're going to take $12,000, right? Kajabi is this, like, I think, an honest transaction, which is you pay us a subscription, you make $0 on the platform, you can make $1 million on a platform. You keep it all, right? All we're asking for is a platform fee, and the rest is up to you to kind of build and do. So our job is to provide better products and services that enable our creators or our heroes to make more money. And that is a cool position to be in, right? Because we're totally aligned in terms of what we want to do. And like, you can kind of see that, like we keep embedding all these, like we made an acquisition of a company called Vibely. We're going to embed it into the product, not free of charge, but it's just like, we're not charging you more for it. It's like putting more value into a subscription that we think will provide more value to our customers, that they can monetize more people will come to us because they're like, Jesus, this is the full thing that's like everything here. And like, there's a lot of goodness there for our customers that we're really excited to kind of execute against.
Yeah. Hey, you've given us a lot of your time here and really appreciate it. I do have one last question for you. And that is, like, we just went through your career path and the different decisions and things that happened that put you on, and put you into different directions. If you had to do it all over again, would you take the same path?
Yeah. Like, yes. I mean, like, I've been really fortunate, man. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. Like, some of these things, again, happen to you along the way where you're really lucky. And I think I've benefited from that. So, like, are there micro optimizations along the way where if I, like, knew Kiwi wasn't going to work out, would I spend 4 years there? But, like, probably not. But then if I look back at it, the skills and the experience and even the feeling of failure to some degree is like a good thing to have, right? In its perspective to have that anytime you're in this tough situation, you're like, things could be a lot worse, right? And so that perspective, I think, you don't get until you've had some downs. So I don't know. I think I'm been like super fortunate through my career so far. I don't think it's been linear, but I think like linearity is boring, right? And so for me, it's been a cool journey. We're not done yet. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm really fortunate so far. So I don't think I would change much.
Yeah. Awesome. One final thing, Ahad, where can people find out more about you? Where do you want to send them?
Kajabi.com, right? Check it out. I think it's, as you guys say, the creator economy, really like putting people and our customers, our heroes, putting their livelihood in their own hands and letting them kind of control their destiny. It's kind of our reason to live. And I think that is just proliferating in the world, right? People are quitting their full-time jobs. They kind of want to work on what they want to do. They always underestimate the markets that actually exist for them. Like, we have customers who help parents like sleep train their kids, making $1 million a year, right? How to become a beekeeper. I can't. Sometimes I question what I'm doing with my daily life, looking at what our companies do, the options they're making, and I just think that's going to become a bigger trend as time goes on, right? Putting the people's lives back in control of themselves, I think, is like a cool business to be a part of, but a trend that I don't think is stopping anytime soon. So as I think about it, it's like everybody here has knowledge, right? We're in the knowledge commerce business, and it's up to us to create a platform that enables people to kind of build a sustainable business around their knowledge. That I think people underestimate their capability to do that sometimes, and I just want to encourage people to kind of put themselves out there and see what can happen, because you'd be surprised.
Awesome. This was awesome, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Leadership Backstory. Make sure to subscribe from your favorite podcast player and leave us a review if you like what you hear. We appreciate you sharing your feedback with other listeners. Peter Barron and Brendan Schneider host The Leadership Backstory. Catch you on the next episode.